When Republicans and Democrats both agree on something, you know it's about to be terrible. Whether it's the war on drugs, wasting trillions of our dollars, or the Patriot Act, when both parties can come together and agree on something and get it done, it's a good sign that the American public is about to get screwed over. And that's just as true on the emerging issue of whether to regulate big tech companies and social media giants. Let's break it down. First, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to Breaking Brad, a series with me, Brad Palumbo, your wonderful and gorgeous host, where we break down the big picture issues in our politics to help you sort fact from fiction and figure out what's really going on. Today, we're talking about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, an obscure federal statute that all of a sudden is at the center of nationwide political controversy again. People from both sides of the political spectrum are angry at big tech, and in some cases with good reason. These companies censor a lot of content that really shouldn't be censored, they have clear biases, and they're responsible for some bad things that happen on their platforms. But is the solution to crack down and regulate them from the halls of Washington, D.C.? I certainly think not. But that's what brings us to Section 230. Which is the main regulation and rule that both Republicans and Democrats increasingly want to use to regulate social media companies to attempt to force them to, whether it be censor less or censor more, accommodate their wishes and preferences. Now for background, Section 230 is a law that simply says that the platform that hosts speech, like YouTube is hosting this video right now, or like Twitter when I tweet my terrible food takes out into the universe, well, the platform isn't legally responsible in terms of civil liability for that content, but the person who posted or said it is. So if, for example, everyone remembers the now infamous incident with Jeffrey Toobin of The New Yorker where he exposed little Toobin during a Zoom call with his work colleagues, that would be like if Zoom was responsible for what Toobin did. That would be our world without Section 230. Keep that in mind because you've probably heard so many different claims and arguments about Section 230 that are wrong or misleading. All it means is that speech, the legal responsibility for online speech, is with the speaker and not the platform. You don't have to take my word for it. The great thing about Section 230 is that it's a short enough law that we can literally just quickly give it a read, the relevant portions at least, right now. See, it says, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. That's simply what I mentioned before about the speaker being responsible for the content, not the platform. Similarly, it says that they can't be held liable for any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. That's all it is, folks. That's Section 230. But the importance of those few words cannot be overstated. Without those legal protections, platforms like Facebook and YouTube as we know it could not exist. There's simply way too much content for them to sort through to possibly, run it all through legal to see if they could be exposing themselves to legal liability. So it is quite literally the words that let the internet exist as we know it. But some people want to take it all down. Before we get into the different proposals and arguments about changing the law, we should dispense with a couple myths that you'll commonly hear about Section 230. One is that it requires companies to either be a platform or a publisher. It doesn't. It gives people protections when they are acting as a platform that they don't get when they are acting as a publisher. So for example, the New York Times is mostly a publisher. But for something like its comments section on its articles, it's a platform. And Section 230 protects the New York Times in its comments section, but when it's acting as a publisher and publishing articles, it's still legally liable for that content. Vice versa. Twitter is mostly a platform, so when I post my terrible food takes, if you're upset, you can't sue Twitter, you have to sue me, right? Or if I post horrible lies about you, it's my legal responsibility that's on the line. But when Twitter puts out its own content through moments or descriptions of trends and other things, it's acting as a publisher on that content and is responsible under 230. So 230 doesn't force you to either be a platform or a publisher. It lets you be either, but when you're acting as each, gives you a level of different protection under the law. One of the other big myths about Section 230 is that it's supposed to only give these companies legal protections if they are neutral, if they are unbiased. But as you could see when I read you the law, it doesn't say that anywhere. What it says is that they have latitude to remove material for all sorts of reasons, including just it being objectionable to them. So that is a myth that you commonly hear, but it's just not true. So let's talk about the first idea that some people have come out with, including people as diverse as President Biden and former President Donald Trump. They have both said on the record that we should repeal Section 230 in its entirety. But that is a disastrous and terrible idea. If we repealed Section 230, there wouldn't be more speech online. There would be less. If Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Instagram were all of a sudden potentially legally liable for all of the content that was posted, they would need to start pre-screening every post that would go out, if they could even allow posts to go at all. Everybody's websites would have to shut off comment sections, or they could be exposed to lawsuits anytime somebody comments something that isn't true. And if you read Facebook comments, that happens quite a lot. Simply put, the internet as we know it couldn't exist, and all these big companies and tech companies would more or less implode without these legal protections in short order. If what you want is more speech and less censorship, repealing Section 230 would achieve the opposite. One of the other suggestions that's pushed by some people is adding to Section 230 a requirement of so-called political neutrality to the law in order for companies to receive the protections that Section 230 already affords them. Basically, they say, well, it should be like that the companies have to be neutral in order to qualify. There's a couple problems for that, which, for one, who gets to decide what's neutral and what isn't? Do we want to put the federal government in charge of deciding whether media companies are neutral enough to deserve legal protections? Who is going to make those determinations? Because I know for a fact that Elizabeth Warren is going to have a very different idea of what is neutral content moderation than Kamala Harris would, or than Mike Pence would, or anyone else, right? Unless you want politicians and their cronies deciding what speech and what is acceptable online and what speech is not, then putting some sort of neutrality requirement into the law isn't a good idea. The other thing that some people suggest is forcing companies under 230 to apply First Amendment standards to their content moderation. This sounds great at first glance, right? Just as if the First Amendment operates in a park, it would operate online. Anything that's legally protected gets to stay up, and anything that's not can come down. But there's some problems with that, because all sorts of terrible and gross things are covered by the First Amendment, rightfully so, but we don't necessarily want them flooding our social media feeds. Number one, pornography. It's First Amendment protected, but thankfully Facebook and Twitter isn't just full of porn all the time. That would make it undesirable for most people to use, and it would make the internet a pretty unhospitable place for teenagers and young people. So why we would want to apply a First Amendment standard that includes obscenity and also includes a lot of hateful speech and deranged things like Holocaust denial or slurs. All of these things, in a free society, people have the right to say under the First Amendment, but companies that run social platforms need to have the leeway to at least moderate some of that stuff out of our feeds. Otherwise, these platforms would be even more toxic cesspools than they already are. At the end of the day, none of the ideas to regulate or fix social media with the federal government are worth anything at all. Now, it's certainly true that big tech and social media platforms have lots of problems, and people are understandably frustrated with some of the decisions that these companies make. But we need to understand, as a society, we need to rediscover the fact that the federal government cannot solve all of our problems. And we can actually address these issues on our own by empowering ourselves as consumers. We can support alternatives to these companies. For example, I started uploading my videos not just on YouTube, but also on Rumble, an alternative site. Go follow me, subscribe to me there. And we can also push back as consumers and customers on these companies so that they know when we don't like their content moderation decisions and they learn from it. A great example is the infamous Hunter Biden story reported by the New York Post that was censored by social media companies right before the election. Well, Twitter came out, they got so much backlash for that they apologized and said they will not do that kind of censorship in the future. That's not great. It still happened. It's still a problem, but consumers speaking out got change there, and in a way that if you had to rely on Congress or federal regulators, it would have just achieved the opposite. All right, guys, I hope you feel like you know more about Section 230 now, and you understand why the push to regulate social media companies is so misguided. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you go in the description below and check out the work by two libertarian commentators who know much more about Section 230 than I, Hannah Cox and Shoshana Weissman, because I relied on their articles and work extensively for the research for this video, so go check them out as well. And with that, guys, make sure that you like this video. Let's try to get it to 200 likes. I'm setting that goal right now, so click that like button. And if you enjoyed this video, if you like that content, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications too. And with that, I'll see you all in the next video.